All right, we are going to get started with this a special edition of STLI's Quick Bite offering. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you are new to the Quick Bite format, I'll just go over a couple of norms for this type of programming from STLI. One is that these are intended to be quick, actionable, practical sessions that share something that you could put into practice, typically this afternoon after the session, if you so desire. There's no expectation that you have your camera on. Please eat your lunch if this is your lunch break. I will not be offended, and I will just assume that you are actively engaged and so excited to be here. We will always share follow-up resources at the end of the session and try to leave a little bit of time for questions. But we do typically invite you to schedule a consultation with us if you have a more extensive thing that you'd like to discuss about your teaching and learning, since these are quick bite sessions, which are really short. Today's quick bite is related to the 8-second rule. I'm Diana Theisinger, STLI's program manager for digital and professional learning. But the ideas that I'm going to be sharing today are inspired by Professor Paul Heideman, a longtime professor at William & Mary who recently retired. He and I have been collaborating on a podcast around some of his lessons learned and research into neuroscience and the science of learning. But a lot of it informed by his 30 plus year career at William & Mary as a biology instructor. And one of the things that we're sharing today is based on Paul's adaptation of the 8-second rule. All right. We at STLI realized that we are in a unique moment because a lot of us, like a high percentage of faculty and staff at William & Mary, all were exposed recently to this competence map quadrant. And we thought, let's see if we can reinforce some of that common language that we have and get some interesting data along the way. So we're going to try something out today. And you guys are our first guinea pigs who we're experimenting on with this framework. I'm going to ask you to participate in a quick poll related to the competence map framework. And I want you to think about, how do you feel personally as an instructor when you get up in front of a class and you ask them, are there any questions about this? Here's where you're going to respond to today's topic. So if you go to this poll by either scanning that QR code on your phone or typing in pollev.com/Diana, that's me, you can indicate on this chart, how does it feel as an instructor when you stand up in front of the class and say, are there any questions about this? All right. Some people right in the middle, some people ready to up their game or eager to implement, and then some people stress center. This is what I hear in my consultations with instructors, is that sometimes they're eager to like move past that awkward pause of waiting for responses because it's uncomfortable. All right. This is what often greets us when we say, are there any questions about this? Somebody's looking at their computer, somebody's, shopping on Amazon, somebody's thinking about what they have to do after class. A few people are nodding attentively, but you're not clear if they're actually considering the question or actually grappling with any tough topics. And the idea behind the 8-second rule is that when you ask this when you ask this to your students and you say, are there any questions? You're then going to wait at least 8 seconds before moving on, which I can tell you from personal experience feels like an absolute eternity when you're standing in front of these faces. Okay, so why does this work? Why would you do this? The science of learning, the neuroscience, shows that the little micro processes that happen in our learners' brains when we say, does anyone have any questions about this, take about 8 seconds to work. Some people say 7 seconds. I think with some of our groups of learners, it takes a little longer than 8 seconds. We're going to talk about that in this session. But that whole process of of understanding, what did my instructor just ask me? Now let me reflect on what we've been talking about and decide if I have a question. Now let me reflect on whether I'm brave enough to raise my hand and formulate and ask that question out loud in front of all of these classmates. That process, and then deciding to actually raise your hand, takes about 8 seconds. So you providing that structured pause time for your learners gives them the time that they need internally to go through those processes and formulate their question. All right. I know that some of you might be thinking, all it is waiting 8 seconds. This is very basic. I don't see how this is going to change anything in my classroom. Um, it does. And oftentimes it works right away. So I do want you to try it, but I also want you to have some tools in your pocket in case you get up there and you ask, are there any questions? And the time has dragged on for 27 seconds and there are still no questions. What can you do? What if this isn't working for you in your classroom? Step one, time yourself. Again, 8 seconds in front of 25 or 125 blank stares feels like forever. So there is a temptation to move on with the lecture, to move on with the next activity in less than 8 seconds. So time yourself, get a trusted colleague or a TA, start a stopwatch on your phone, whatever process works for you. The other pivot you can make if you find that this isn't working, or if you are skeptical that just waiting 8 seconds is going to make a difference, is to frame this as a certainty. You're in front of the class, you know, based on your experience teaching this topic, giving this lecture to previous classes, or just the complexity of the topic that you've introduced, you know there are questions. You know that there are misunderstandings sitting in the brains of the learners in your room. So framing it in the form of a statement can be another effective way to elicit more responses from your students, saying, I'm sure that someone has a question about this. It's a complex topic. I'm going to give you more time to formulate your question. And then you might have to reset that 8 second clock. If you led with, does anyone have any questions? And you got crickets, and you restate and say, I'm sure someone has questions. I'm going to give you some more time to formulate. Give them another 8 seconds. The other recommendation here is to try this with pairs or small groups first. So to tell your students, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to talk with a partner, to talk with a small group, and I want you all to figure out what questions you might have around this topic that we've just discussed or that I've introduced. And what this does is it gives them some cover in front of the class in that social pressure setting, because now they can frame it as, well, we didn't understand. We still have this question, not I, as a lone wolf, am the only person in class brave enough to admit that I didn't understand. Oh, I'm going to go back to this for 1 second. If you are a screenshot person or a photo person with your phone, or if you just needed another minute to write that down, this is your chance to steal that. Please do. Okay, I'm also going to give you a little checklist to think about as you are implementing the 8 second rule. Plan ahead in your lecture or your class as you're thinking about how that class session is going to flow. When are you going to deploy the 8 second rule? It's not after every single question. It's at times where you've introduced a complex topic, or at times where you're about to pivot to a new topic. And the thing that you've just finished covering is foundational knowledge. You don't want to find out 2 lectures from now that there were some real fundamental misunderstandings in that first fundamental discussion of topics. So that's a point to strategically deploy the 8 second rule and say, I'm going to really give some time to make sure that nobody in the class has a follow-up question about this topic. I would also encourage you, if you're a person who's not super comfortable in front of 125 blank stares, tell your students that you're doing this. So that can dissipate some of the awkwardness or discomfort for you as an instructor to say, hey, I'm trying something new this month. This is why I'm trying it. Steely was telling us about how it takes learners 8 seconds to decide whether they have a question, decide whether they're brave enough to ask it, formulate it into coherent English, and then raise their hand in front of a class. So I'm going to try giving you a little bit more response time before I move on. And then I'll also say, be transparent when you're using it. This is when you watch or when you listen to the podcast with Dr. Heideman that comes out later this month, you're going to hear him say that sometimes if he's getting to that like 6 second mark and he still doesn't have any substantive questions, he'll start counting out loud, 7, 1,000, 8, 1,000. Just to let students know, like, hey, I'm waiting for you. I'm giving you time. Think about whether maybe you do have a question right now. Okay, we're Steely. This is practical. We're going to give you a chance to practice it. I'm going to invite everybody to feel what it feels like to be silent for 8 seconds and wait for a response. At the end of this 8 seconds, if anyone does have an actual question, I can address it. But right now, I'm just going to say, does anyone have any questions about what we've practiced so far? That was a little over 8 seconds, and it was terrifying, even though I knew I was going to do it. Does anyone have any questions? I don't see any in the chat. All right. I'm going to give you a little bonus tip here because we have a couple of extra minutes left in our quick bite. This is another thing that comes from Professor Heideman that he doesn't say good question when students ask a question in class, unless it really does strike him as a good question. Like he's been teaching for 30 plus years and somebody asks him something that he's never considered or thought of before. Wow, great question. But let's say that it's not that. Here are some alternatives that once those questions start coming in, here are some alternatives to that reflexive good question. I'm glad you asked that. This bears repeating. I love this one for when like we really did just cover this. Your neighbor just asked this and you were zoned out. Oh, this bears repeating. That way you're preserving your student's dignity, but you're not lying to the rest of the class that you thought that was a good question. Yes, let's review that. Or something that will really wake your class up and get their attention if they've started to fade is, that's something that might come up on a future exam. Suddenly everyone is awake and taking notes. If you're a screenshot person or a phone photo person, this is another resource that you could just steal directly as a reminder for later. All right, we're going to come back to this graph and I'm going to ask you, oh, let me clear my one response. Oh, cancel. Okay, go back to the image. I'm going to ask you to respond again based on using the 8 second rule. How many of you are feeling confident and comfortable about giving this a try in your class? Ooh, okay, exciting. Looks like people feel comfortable giving that a try. I love seeing that we've moved out of the stress center for those who were feeling a little nervous about that idea before. All right. Thanks for participating in our confidence map feedback experiment. That was a little nerve-wracking for the first quick bite. All right. I'm going to leave you with this. We want to see you more often. We want to see you in person. We want you to spend more time with Steely. So here are some ways that you can do that. First of all, we have courses available for you all the time at academy.wm.edu, including our College Teaching Essentials series for beginning, intermediate, and advanced teaching strategies in higher ed. Those feature your colleagues at William and Mary, as well as student testimonials and tons of resources related to increasing student engagement. The Change One Thing podcast is coming out starting September 25th, and we are going to have so many, like I had so much fun in the podcast studio with Professor Heideman just talking about his career, his lessons learned, and really great actionable practical things for you to try. So look forward to that. And then all semester, we're going to have sessions related to generative AI, accessibility, and more of these change one thing quick bite sessions. So please join us. We have two sessions coming up. One is in the AI series. It's called Red Card, Green Card. Join us for that next week. And then the week after that, we have another quick bite about sort of a workaround for the fact that we lost Microsoft Flip and needed an alternative for video discussion boards. Thanks so much for joining today. Stay on if you have any questions. And otherwise, we'll see you next time.